Hello, I am Courtney Paschal, and this is our presentation about traumatic brain injuries. We will go over and highlight the definition, some different causes of traumatic brain injuries, characteristics, some inclusion tips, and some other instructional strategies when working with individuals with traumatic brain injury. All right, so I'm going to go get into what is traumatic brain injury, the definition. Like any other definition that IDEA gives, it's pretty lengthy, so I'm just going to pinpoint some of the more important parts of the definition. First, the injury was acquired, and it was acquired after birth. It was caused by some sort of an external force. So it can either be open or closed head injury, and with that there are impairments in some areas, either one or more areas. Say it be areas like cognition, language, maybe memory or attention, maybe those reasoning and abstract thinking or judgment. It might be an impairment in problem solving or sensory perceptional or your more motor abilities, possibly impairments in your psychosocial behavior, your physical functions, information processing, speech. So that's the main part of the definition. It was acquired after birth, external force. It can be either open or closed head injury. Now, let's get into the causes. How does a child or a person get a traumatic brain injury? So the leading cause of a traumatic brain injury is falls. Now, these falls are common in younger kids from the newborn to 4-year-old, and then falls are also common in the older 75 plus age group. So that's where the falls are most common for traumatic brain injuries. The leading cause of death from traumatic brain injury typically comes from automobile accidents. Now, this reaches a different age group. This is the age group from about 20 years old to 24 years old. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it does come from those drinking under the influence, or driving under the influence, types of accidents. So the next one on the list is struck by or against something. And typically we see that traumatic brain injuries come from recreational. So like playing sports, maybe getting hit in the head with a baseball or striking your head against something while you're skiing or snowboarding. Next on the list is assault. Now it says firearms or abuse. I'm going to go more towards the abuse, and unfortunately this is one of the leading causes for children under 1 year old is this child abuse. It's also common for the kids up until about 5 years old. So this is where you'll see shaken baby syndrome, which is branches right off of traumatic brain injuries. So those are some of the main causes of why people end up with a traumatic brain injury. The characteristics of a traumatic brain injury really depend on how bad the injury was. So was the traumatic brain injury mild, moderate, or severe? It also has a lot to do with what side of the brain it affected or the particular site of the injury. So an individual with a traumatic brain injury will see changes in their physical side of things. So they'll see a change in coordination possibly and fine motor skills. They'll become a little more weak and fatigued. You might see an individual that was very athletic before they got the traumatic brain injury, and then after they really start to struggle with the things they used to do. Now, with this, as the brain heals, things start to become a lot easier. And as they go through their occupational therapy or whatever rehabilitation that they go through, they're going to start to get stronger, and these changes are going to start to improve. The cognitive, the academic side of things, this really depends on the severity of things. So those individuals that have a mild traumatic brain injury, they're not going to see a ton of these changes happen. So the changes in speech, memory, planning, and problem solving skills. However, those with the moderate traumatic brain injury, they're going to struggle on the academic side of things. Their memory might not be as good as it was before. Problem solving skills might be something that they really struggle with. Those with severe obviously are going to have the most significant impairments, academic and speech. There are a lot of cases where individuals that have a traumatic brain injury, they aren't able to talk for the first couple months. Now, with the cognitive, it depends again a lot on the severity of the injury, like I said, but also the age of the child. Um, they say that children injured under the age of 4 have greater rates of cognitive impairment than those over 4. So that has a lot to do with the characteristics that we'll see of a traumatic brain injury as well. Individuals with traumatic brain injuries will also see emotional behavior and social changes. Um, Again, this is going to depend on how bad the injury was, the severity of the injury, and the location of the injury. So, an individual with a traumatic brain injury might start having problems in building those close friendships. They might have trouble solving social problems that they come across or recognizing the emotions of others or themselves. An individual with a traumatic brain injury might also have higher levels of internalizing and externalizing behavior problems. So, the internalizing problems might be that anxiety they might feel or depression that they're going through. They might also, on the externalizing side, um, have that aggressive side to them, the aggressive behavior to them. So, those are some of the emotional behavior and social changes that we might see from an individual with a traumatic brain injury.
Students that experience a traumatic brain injury, possibly over break or during the school year, will need assistance transitioning from the hospital to the school. It's very important for the hospital and the educators to keep up to date with the progress. Educators should also update the health professional staff at the school with the student's progress. The health professional would then be able to make accommodations and have a plan set up at their office for any need that the student has. Educators are then up to date with the progress and are able to start planning ahead for when the student returns to the school. One of the biggest things in that transition time is that student learning new social skills and social behaviors, being they might be limited in their physical and mental abilities. It's important to set up a social skill plan on how to adapt in the school, and it's also important to set up a plan on the change of behavior as well. There are two things that an educator can do is set up goals at the school and goals for the home. Educators would set up goals at the school of educational and physical goals for the student, and then also have the family have goals at home. This helps the parents and any siblings at home with the transition of their sibling or their son or daughter. Having those goals at home, the family is in charge of keeping track and they're included with it as well. The family then would report to the educator on how they are doing, and that way there is a constant communication that is clear and concise for the student to help develop and grow.
So, as we know, a huge focus in today's education is inclusion. So, we want to keep those individuals with disabilities in the general classroom for as long as we can throughout the day. So, I'm going to give some different tips on how we can include individuals with traumatic brain injuries. So, there are a few different areas where we might see challenges with these individuals and how we can respond to them or deal with them. So we might see some sort of a challenge in their behavior. They might have those outbreaks or outbursts, those meltdowns. What we can do is teach them problem solving strategies. So when they get frustrated, they know how to deal with that. They might have a special place in the classroom that they go to just cool down, or they might have a certain person that helps them with that. So having those peers in the classroom to help out is great too, and you'll see that in the next few tips. So, like I said, there's social changes in an individual with a traumatic brain injury. So they might have a lot of troubles with their social skills, and with the emotions of other people, that type of thing. What we can do is work with the speech and language pathologist and maybe the social or the school counselor to figure out how we can get that student to work on those social skills. You see role play as one of my tips, so I'm going to go a little more into that. So you can have a role play social activity type of a thing where they are working on those social skills during that role play activity. So that's one approach, one tip that you can use for an individual with a traumatic brain injury that's having trouble with those social interactions. Um, like I said before, educational performance might be a challenge for them. So they're not where they were before the traumatic brain injury was acquired. It might take them longer to do things. It might just be harder. The whole process might be harder for them. Learning new things might be harder. So what we can do is we can use cooperative learning groups to help them out. So they might have a friend or a partner that helps them practice those skills, those memory skills, that type of a thing. And what we need to do is make sure that they know the expectations. They might be able to plan a little bit farther in advance for projects or other things like that. Um, as for classroom attitudes, they might be more confused or not up to pace with what is expected in the classroom. So maybe what the rules are for certain times or routines. They might not understand what is expected on certain types of assignments or tests. What we can do is give them a rubric that that gives exactly what we are expecting, and we should go over those rubrics with them. Or they can also have kind of like a study buddy or someone who keeps them on track during the instructional time. So, those are just some different tips that we can use to make sure these students with traumatic brain injuries get the most time in the general classroom as possible.
Students that are in early childhood with a TBI, it is important for the educational staff to work as a team. That is the biggest part for the student to grow, and they're going to learn the most there. In early childhood, the main focus is collaboration. There are two main components in this collaboration. One is partnering to achieve the goals, and second is to distribute the leadership throughout the team. They need to start with building a team structure, defining the school policies, determining a core teaching team, and then when that is all determined, they are to work as a team designed for that individual student. Everything that team focuses on is going to be with the universal design methods. The student then will be able to work with a team of teachers to help them in their education. The instructional strategies in elementary and middle school are very similar. Students with TBI experience a method called positive interdependence. Positive interdependence refers to group work with specific roles for each student. This sets up for individual accountability. The book refers to all of this as students engage in different levels of learning and their tasks vary, as the case of the universally designed learning, but each task is essential to the overall success of the group. Each student has a task or a role to play in the group, and when their task and role is completed, the whole group is able to succeed based off of each individual's work. The positive interdependence is very important for students with TBI. This keeps them in the classroom. They are included and they're engaging with fellow classmates to a specific role. They're also learning social skills while they work together and separate from other students. An effective learning strategy for students in high school with a traumatic brain injury is problem solving. Problem solving comes with three key components. The first one is to identify the problem. The student would answer, is this problem caused by me, or is this problem caused by someone else? The second step is to define and explain the problem. Ask the student what the problem is. The book uses an example of the student answering that question as the teacher is mean. Now, as an educator, we are to navigate them through that problem because the problem really isn't the teacher is mean. There's a different issue behind why the teacher is mean. You can navigate questions like, well, how is the teacher mean? Did the teacher hurt you? Did the teacher give you, call you a bad name? The student more likely will not answer those questions or give no to those questions. The student might end up saying, well, I got a bad grade on this test. That's why the teacher is mean. Where the define and explaining part of this problem is really helping the student navigate through the problem and talk through it as the student discovers what the real problem is. The third step is to find a solution. The solution comes with a 5-step process. The first step is to identify relevant alternatives or options. These are to be real options. They're to be concrete and attainable. The second step is to identify consequences of the options. This is kind of a cause and effect, or possible outcomes with the option that the student has chosen. The third step is to identify the probability of each. The student then would kind of go through, would this option have a positive effect, a neutral effect, having no change, or a negative effect, having a change that is not good? And then also going through the likelihood of each of those. The fourth step is very important. It's to determine the value of each option. This can be done using a pros and cons list, and you can write those options out, or you can go with a risk versus a reward. Is this going to be a high risk option, something that might not work and have a lot of negative consequences? Or is it going to bring a reward, kind of a win-win situation? And the fifth and final step is to integrate the values and consequences to select the preferred option. This is after going through all the 4 prior steps, and the student ends up making a choice based off of what they have gone through. Problem solving is very important for students in high school. This helps them set up for college in the future. It helps them set up for continued education, whatever that might be. This helps them set up for life after school. They're able to navigate their problems, work it out, and figure out the best outcome for not only themselves, but those around them.